and they were all pretty hardcore. They were gentlemen. I mean, they weren't assholes. They were nice men, but they were hardcore. They were hardworking.
Sam Elliott has always been more than just the man with the mustache and the gravelly voice. For decades, he carved out a unique place in Hollywood as the ultimate cowboy, rugged, no-nonsense, and deeply rooted in old-school values. Unlike many of his peers who played the game of fame, Elliott stayed true to himself. He didn't chase trends, didn't bend to the pressures of Hollywood politics, and never pretended to like someone just for the sake of getting along. That honesty, both refreshing and intimidating, earned him respect. But it also meant he clashed with certain people along the way. Behind the cameras, Elliott was known for being professional and disciplined. But when it came to personalities that rubbed him the wrong way, he didn't hide his feelings. In an industry built on facades, Elliott stood firm, often calling out behavior he considered fake, arrogant, or downright unprofessional. Some actors admired his candor. Others found themselves on the receiving end of his cold disdain. These weren't small disagreements or casual dislikes. For Elliott, authenticity mattered above everything else, and when someone violated that unwritten code, they lost his respect, sometimes forever. Over the years, he quietly built a mental list of stars he simply couldn't stand. To understand why Sam Elliott built up such strong feelings toward certain actors, you first have to know what made him tick. Elliott was old school in every sense of the word. He came into Hollywood in the late 1960s when the industry was shifting, when flashy, rebellious stars were starting to replace the stoic heroes of the golden age. For Elliott, the craft of acting wasn't about attention-grabbing headlines or ego-driven stunts. It was about honesty, respect, and showing up ready to work. He never chased gossip, and he didn't indulge in the drama that consumed many of his peers. That's why, when he did encounter people whose personalities clashed with his values, he didn't shrug it off. He carried it with him. To Elliott, disrespect on set wasn't just bad manners. It was an insult to the art of filmmaking. Over the years, a few high-profile names managed to cross him in ways he never forgot. The first name on that list is Richard Gere. By the time Elliott and Gere crossed paths, Gere had built a reputation as a leading man who thrived on glamour and attention. Behind the scenes, though, Elliott found him arrogant. Their approaches to acting couldn't have been more different. Gere was known to challenge directors, sometimes halting production to argue about how a scene should unfold. Elliott, on the other hand, believed in discipline, trusting the process and respecting the crew's time. Watching Gere treat film sets like his personal stage didn't sit right with him. Elliott didn't scream or start a public feud, but his disapproval was clear. As one insider once revealed, Elliott described Gere as all surface, no depth. That alone was enough to ensure the two would never get along. Another actor who clashed with Elliott's straightforward style was Val Kilmer. Kilmer, especially during his peak in the 80s and 90s, had a reputation for being difficult to work with. Brilliant on screen, but behind the scenes he was notoriously temperamental. Elliott reportedly saw Kilmer as someone who wasted time with theatrics instead of respecting the crew and cast who had to keep things running. That attitude grated on Elliott, who believed professionalism wasn't negotiable. The tension between the two was most noticeable when Elliott heard stories from other actors who had worked directly with Kilmer. From tantrums on set to clashes with directors, Kilmer's reputation preceded him. Elliott wasn't the type to tolerate diva behavior, and in interviews over the years, he made it clear that he had little patience for people who thought they were above the team effort required to make movies. Kilmer embodied everything he disliked. Talented but self-indulgent, gifted but impossible to fully respect. For Elliott, both Gere and Kilmer were cautionary tales of what happens when actors let fame get to their heads. To him, being in Hollywood wasn't about being worshipped. It was about doing the work, and when people forgot that, he made no secret of the fact that he couldn't stand them. Sam Elliott's long career gave him the chance to work with, or at least cross paths with, just about every type of actor in Hollywood. Some he admired deeply, but others left a sour taste in his mouth. For Elliott, the deciding factor always came down to one word: authenticity. If he sensed an actor was faking it, whether in their performance or in their personality, he was quick to call them out in private and sometimes in public. Two more names stand out as examples of people Elliott never warmed up to: Chevy Chase and Shia LaBeouf. Chevy Chase, best known for Saturday Night Live and the National Lampoon films, built his career on sharp wit and slapstick comedy. But behind that image was a man notorious for his difficult personality. Castmates from SNL have long spoken about how abrasive Chase could be, and his temper made him infamous on sets. To Elliott, that kind of ego-driven behavior was more than just annoying. It was damaging to the teamwork required to bring a production together. Elliott had always valued humility, and Chevy Chase seemed to embody the opposite. Reports of Chase berating crew members and belittling younger actors didn't surprise Elliott in the least. He considered Chase a cautionary tale of how fame could twist a person. For Elliott, the lack of respect Chase showed others meant he was a man to avoid. He wasn't impressed by comedic brilliance if it came packaged with arrogance and cruelty. Then there was Shia LaBeouf, one of the younger names Elliott grew frustrated with. LaBeouf started as a promising child actor, eventually rising to fame through films like Transformers. But his later years were filled with controversies: public meltdowns, bizarre performance art stunts, and a reputation for erratic behavior. To Elliott, who had always valued steady professionalism, LaBeouf's antics were an insult to the craft of acting. Elliott didn't hate LaBeouf because he was young or different. He disliked him because his unpredictability created chaos. Stories of LaBeouf clashing with directors, storming off sets, or treating projects as experiments rubbed Elliott the wrong way. To a man who had built his reputation on discipline and commitment, LaBeouf represented everything that was wrong with a newer generation of Hollywood stars. Privately, Elliott is said to have described actors like Chase and LaBeouf as showboats. The label was damning because, in Elliott's world, acting was never about self-promotion or constant headlines. He felt both men put themselves above the work, and above the people they worked with. What's interesting is that Elliott didn't just quietly dislike them. He used these examples when speaking to younger actors who asked him for advice. He often stressed the importance of humility and respect, warning that talent means nothing if you can't work well with others. While he may not have shouted his grudges from the rooftops, it was clear to anyone who knew him which personalities rubbed him the wrong way. By the time Elliott had firmly made up his mind about Chevy Chase and Shia LaBeouf, his list of least favorite colleagues was already shaping into something of a philosophy. He wasn't just pointing fingers at people he didn't like personally. He was highlighting a pattern. Whether they were from his own generation or the one that came decades later, Elliott had no patience for actors who let ego overpower respect. By the time Sam Elliott was well into his later years, his reputation as a no-nonsense straight shooter had become as much a part of his identity as his famous mustache and gravelly voice. He was respected not just for the roles he played, but for the kind of man he was off-screen: disciplined, loyal, and unwilling to compromise on his values. That's why the last name on his list of actors he couldn't stand is perhaps the most telling of them all: Tom Cruise. Now, Cruise may seem like an odd choice. After all, he's one of the most successful and bankable stars in Hollywood history. But to Elliott, Cruise represented the ultimate version of everything he distrusted about the business. Where Elliott valued substance, Cruise seemed to Elliott like a master of style. While Elliott worked his way up through grit and smaller roles, Cruise's career had always been fueled by stardom, spectacle, and the relentless machinery of celebrity culture. Elliott had nothing against hard work. He respected anyone who put in the effort. But what bothered him most about Cruise was the sense that the man had become more brand than actor. Cruise's devotion to jaw-dropping stunts, massive franchises, and overproduced blockbusters symbolized to Elliott the shift in Hollywood away from meaningful stories and toward empty spectacle. It wasn't that Cruise lacked talent. It was that his career choices rarely prioritized authenticity. Adding to Elliott's disdain were Cruise's highly publicized personal controversies. His ties to Scientology, his infamous outbursts in interviews, and his carefully curated image only deepened Elliott's skepticism. To a man who valued privacy and humility, Cruz's approach to fame felt calculated and hollow. Elliott reportedly told friends that he could never see past the performance, meaning that with Cruz, he always felt like he was watching an act, even off camera. In the end, what Elliott disliked about Cruz and about all the actors on his list wasn't personal as much as it was philosophical. Richard Gere's arrogance, Val Kilmer's temper, Chevy Chase's cruelty, Shia LaBeouf's chaos, Nicolas Cage's theatrics, Charlie Sheen's implosion, and Tom Cruise's carefully manufactured stardom all embodied, in different ways, the traits Elliott rejected. For him, acting was sacred, something that deserved respect. When actors treated it as a playground for ego, spectacle, or self-destruction, Elliott couldn't forgive it. And yet, there's a certain irony in Elliott's candor. His criticisms weren't about stirring up gossip or creating feuds. They were about protecting something he loved. He wasn't a man chasing headlines. He was someone who wanted Hollywood to remain a place where hard work and honesty mattered. By pointing out what he despised in others, he was really reminding everyone of what he valued most. Looking back, Elliott's list doesn't just reveal his grudges, it reveals his principles. He hated arrogance because he valued humility. He hated chaos because he valued discipline. He hated spectacle without substance because he valued authenticity. In a way, his dislikes are just as telling as his career itself. They show us the lines he refused to cross, and why he remained such a respected figure long after many of his peers faded. So when people ask who Sam Elliott hated the most, the real answer isn't about one actor's name. It's about a pattern of behavior he spent his life rejecting. His legacy is one of grit, honesty, and respect for the craft, and perhaps that's why, even when he spoke about those he couldn't stand, it only made his fans love him more.